So the first thing we're gonna do, obviously, is jack up the car. Then we're gonna flush the coolant because we are replacing the radiator and the entire expansion tank along with the hoses connected to it. All right, so you're gonna wanna set up your bucket right under the hose. So that looks about good right there. If you look at this clip right there, you're just gonna push it in order to remove the sensor. Then you can see the sensor's out, and make sure you just put that to the side somewhere. That way it doesn't get wet. You just stick it right there, and it's out of the way. Now, this plug for the sensor has two clips on the side. You're just gonna squeeze them and pull the plug out, and then all the coolant will start coming out. All right, I also did forget, take the cap off. All right, so here we are under the car on the right side, right next to the hose that we just drained. So you're gonna look right here in between here, and there's gonna be a 13 millimeter way up there. It's kind of hard to see. It's this one right there. So that's the coolant drain bolt. So we're just gonna grab a 13 millimeter with an extension, and I have a wobble. It might be helpful because it is a pretty tight area, and we're just gonna connect the ratchet after. All right, so as you can see, have the extension on right there. Just gonna take my ratchet, loosen it, and then remove the ratchet when it's loose enough and take it off by hand with the extension. And make sure you have your bucket under also, so you don't make too big of a mess. I also ended up putting cardboard right here just in case. Okay, so you can see it's starting to come out now. Shit. So I did lose track of the drain bolt a little bit while all of that happened. So I ended up taking this under panel off, and drain bolt was on it. All right, so these are the washers that you'll need. Here's the part number. So I found it was easier to just get the drain bolt in by hand and then put the extension on after. So now it's as tight as I could get it by hand. You wanna make sure definitely to not strip this hole, because that would just be a bitch. So now I'm just gonna grab the torque wrench, try to slip it in here somehow, and torque it to 18 foot-pounds. So the best expansion tank that I could find was this one by Moroso. So as you can see, it's literally the same shape. The only thing different that I was reading about this one is that it does not have the port for the coolant level sensor. Then I also did get new hoses that connect to the expansion tank. So I have this long one, which is this whole hose right here that goes all the way to the upper radiator hose. Then I have this one as well, which is this one right here. And then, like I said, just this overflow hose right here. All right, so to remove this intake scoop, it has these tabs right here, 4 of them. So I just have this plastic trim tool. You just stick it in between these two, and then just pry up, just like that. And then there you go. Now we have access to this hose that goes from the expansion tank to the upper radiator hose. All right, so this hose just has these clips. What you want to do is take a screwdriver. I just have this pocket screwdriver, stick it under this area right there, and just pop it up just like that. Now just make sure you save this because it is for the upper radiator hose. So now you just want to pull this out. Might be a little rough. Now usually I would say be careful, but we are replacing this, so I guess if you break it, doesn't really matter. So you can see I took it out. Okay, so yeah, you do want to remove this screw because it is connected to a plate that connects the expansion tank to this. So we're gonna remove that. And then also, if you look under, it has like this little grommet that goes in there. Same thing for this side, so you're gonna have to pop it out a little bit. Then under the expansion tank is the coolant level sensor. So it just has a tab right here. You're gonna push in and then just pull it off. Then expansion tank is off. All right, so you're just gonna slip this in the same way that you took this one out. It has these little grommets as well, so you just push them in and then line up this hole and then just put this one back. So just tighten those up and then we'll get the new hoses back on. All right, so after installing the expansion tank, we're gonna connect this hose that goes from the expansion tank to the engine right here. So we're just gonna start by putting the engine part on. I think you just push it on and it just takes a lot of force. There you go. So you got that part on. Now we're gonna put the expansion tank part on. Same thing, just there you go. Once you hear that click, you're good. Now I would say just pull both sides to make sure it's on good. As you can see, it's not going anywhere. So now we have that part on. Next, we're gonna put this hose on that goes from the expansion tank to the upper radiator hose. So we are gonna need a hose clamp. So let's just see which one is going to fit good. I think this one's good. So like I said, I bought this kit from Harbor Freight. It's just a whole bunch of different sizes of hose clamps. Now make sure you position it upwards, that way you have access to the bolt. Then just slide this on all the way and tighten it. All right, so I'm currently putting the overflow hose on. Now this one doesn't need a hose clamp because it's pretty tight. So you just basically just have to force it on to this part, and it really doesn't connect to anything. I'm probably just gonna route it through under here somewhere, because it's basically just if you overfill the expansion tank, then that's where the coolant is gonna come out of. So as you can see right there, I'm pretty sure that's where it was before, because you can see all of the coolant. So you can just put it down there somewhere. All right, now for routing the hose that goes from the expansion tank to the upper radiator hose, it has these clips right here. So just make sure you put it in these clips. And then put it under this support bracket on top of the radiator. And then, like I said before, remember to save this off of the upper radiator hose, because we're going to use it right now. So now just put the hose into the upper radiator hose as much as you can, and you'll see it line up right there. And then just slip this little clip back into place right there. And there you go. Just give it a little tug, make sure it's not going to come out, and you're good. You have that set up now. Now that basically completes the expansion tank. Alright, so now that we have the expansion tank installed, do not forget that there's no coolant in the car, so don't start it. Next, we're going to be installing the Mishimoto radiator and the Mishimoto oil cooler. So all this stuff will be linked in the description, including the expansion tank and all the part numbers, tools, torque specs, everything you'll need. So the oil cooler came with these two oil lines, this one and this one, and then these fittings, and then the radiator came with these screws, and then this is the tool to remove the mechanical fan. So I have already installed the Mishimoto electric fan, but if you haven't, you'll usually have like a shroud right here, and you'll have to disconnect the fan from this area. There's other YouTube videos on how to do that, but since this is different, I'm just going to be showing you guys how to remove this one, put it to the side, and then install the new radiator. So to start installing the new radiator, we're going to want to disconnect the upper and lower radiator hose. So these type of connects are like the same as the one that we did earlier. You just use a screwdriver, pry this up, and the hose will come off. It might take a little force to get it off, especially if it's been a while since the last time it came off. Same thing for the bottom one. Just pop up this tab right there. And then pry the hose off. Okay, so I did end up removing my intake and the heat shield, so I would have more space to remove this upper hose. And then I got the bottom hose off as well. You might want to put a bucket under because it did have a little bit of coolant in there still. All right, so right now I'm under the car. This is like the oil cooler assembly. So on the right side right here, there's a T25. Then on the left side, there's also a T25, which I took off. These are the top screws. So if you look at the bottom, there's 1 and 2 more T25s. So I took off the ones on the left side. Now I'm doing the ones on the right side. And then we're gonna take off this one T40 for the oil lines that connects it to the oil cooler. All right, so I got the oil lines off of the oil cooler. As you can see, it leaked quite a bit of oil. So there they are right there. Now that we got the bottom oil lines off, we're gonna come up here by the upper radiator hose and disconnect the top of the oil lines. So as you can see, they're right above the alternator, which I've covered in bubble wrap, just in case there's a lot of oil in them like there was in the bottom. So it's the same size, a T40. So we're just gonna take them off the same way we did with the bottom. Okay, so it has this little connector. We're just gonna move that to the side and then pull these lines off. Okay, the first one came off easy. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any oil leaking from the top ones. So just set those down and figure out how to take it out. All right, so once you get these top ones off, just make sure that these O-rings from the OEM oil lines are off. So there's one stuck right here, so just put your finger in and just take it out, because the new Mishimoto oil lines come with new O-rings. So you might need 2 people to remove the hoses and also to fully remove the heat shield if you have an intake, or if you have the air box, you're definitely gonna have to remove that. So what I did is I just fed it up from the bottom, and my wonderful girlfriend helped me pull it out to make sure it wasn't getting stuck on anything. And then we got them out right here. Now after doing that, we're gonna move on to removing the radiator, since that has to go on before the new oil cooler does. Okay, so if you're only replacing your oil cooler, you can skip this part because we're gonna be removing the fan and the radiator. So to begin removing the fan, it's gonna be a T25. I have 1 bolt up here and 2 bolts down there. But keep in mind, it will be different if you have the stock mechanical fan. So right here from the bottom of the car, we have 1 T25 on the left side and 1 T25 on the right side. So we're just gonna be moving those real quick. So now we're gonna remove this top screw, and just be careful if you have this wiring set up. So now we're just gonna carefully bring the fan up. And just set it right here. So first we're gonna remove the upper T25 radiator support screw. So it's right here by the hose, just move that under. And then there you go. Okay, so I removed this hose that goes to the upper radiator hose. I just lowered it under the radiator right here. And then once you have this top screw off, the radiator should just be able to pull out. So you just kind of have to wiggle it out and watch where you're going with it. Okay, so just make sure that you have the lower radiator hose completely off, because it was kind of holding me back. So you're gonna have to pull it out from like this right side where these other lines are. And then once you pry it out from there, you should be able to just move them to the side a little bit and pull it up.
Oh shit. Oh my god. Oh my. Yeah, don't do that.
Okay, so we got the new radiator in. I took some messing around, but I figured it was easier to get it in from the left side of the car first because it has this clip that goes into like a little slot in the car that holds it in place right here. And you have to get that by these hoses. So you have more space if you go slide it in right here and then push it in. And then right as soon as I pushed it in, this side also went in right there. So now it's in place. We have to put these screws. So we're gonna put the left screw first because the right screw also holds the fan. So you wanna get it threaded in by hand first because you definitely don't want to strip that. And if you're using an electric ratchet like me, you don't wanna over tighten it. So just go slow until you can feel it get snug. So right here, it still feels a little loose, but that's just because we have to put the rest of the screws in. Okay, so under the car right here, looking at the radiator, you'll notice it has these two little slots. And then if you look at the oil cooler, it has these two prongs. So you're gonna slide those prongs into the slots and the radiator is gonna support the oil cooler. So now to mount the oil cooler, make sure you use the two supplied hex bolts. So I already got one in right here. Okay, so now that we got the oil cooler mounted onto the bottom of the radiator, we're gonna connect this fitting for the oil lines. So make sure it's set up like this with the grooves this way and both of the threads facing out along with the screw. So now we're just gonna remove the screw real quick. And be sure to not drop these because they're not being held in place right now. But just get them into the place. Make sure it's pretty snug. Then once they're in, you're gonna grab the screw and just thread it in slowly by hand. And once you have it in enough, you can start to tighten it with a ratchet. Make sure everything is good and in place. Make sure these lines are as tight as they can be. Take it slow too because you don't want to break anything or go too fast. There you go. So now it's a little tight, give it a little by hand, and it should be good. So now we're ready to connect the oil lines. So you're gonna have a 3-foot oil line and a 1-foot oil line. So the 1-foot one is gonna have two 45-degree angles, and the long one is gonna have a 90-degree angle and a 45-degree angle. So I couldn't really find any instructions online on how to install the Mishimoto oil cooler. So I'm kind of just figuring it out as I go. But what I'm assuming is the long one is gonna go onto the right side of the car since it has to go all the way from down there up to here. And then the short one is gonna go from the left side of the car since it just has to go from this area up to here. All right, so what I ended up doing to get these oil lines onto the fitting above the alternator is I originally had this on, but I took it off so that I could screw these on straight. And then I put it back in, then I put the middle screw, and then I tightened it in order to use it to push the plate against this. So you want to be very careful to not strip the screw. I almost did, but luckily it's fine. And you can take a look. I don't know if you can see how good you can see right there, but there's no gap. So you just want to make sure that it's not too tight, but tight enough to where these can't move anymore. And now we're going to use the oil line stay provided by Mishimoto to keep these oil lines in place. So the way I routed these oil lines is I put the long one with the 90-degree angle on the right side of the oil cooler, then all the way straight across the oil cooler and up and under this bolt that's right next to the pulleys. And then it goes onto the left port right there. And then the shorter line goes with the 45-degree angle coming up and then into the right port. And then I have the oil line stay right here, right under the alternator. That way it could keep them in place and not move anywhere or hit the pulley under. And you have to make sure that these are in the right way that I just said, because one is return and one is feed. Now we're gonna put the Mishimoto fan back in. Longest screw from the radiator or the fan support. Then just lift it right here to line it up. And just thread it in by hand. Okay, you want to do it too tight because you don't want to strip or break the plastic that's behind it. Then I did remove the screw on the left so I could move the radiator around a little bit. So now we're going to put that one back in. And then same thing, you don't want to over tighten it because you are putting it into some plastic. Okay, so for the bottom screws of the radiator, we're actually going to be using these supplied 10mm bolts because the threads on the old ones are not the same. So as you can see, I've already got one in right here. Just gotta tighten a little more. Then let's go and put the other one in on the right side. So now that we have the Mishimoto radiator with the Mishimoto fan, we'll be able to remove this probe temperature sensor and put this one on that originally came with the fan. So if you look down here on the radiator, there's a little bolt going into a port. It's a T30. So we're gonna remove that and it'll give us a place to screw this in. Okay, so now that we got that little plug out, we're putting this one in. So the new sensor size is a 19 wrench. So we're just gonna tighten it up as much as we can. Okay, so I ended up tightening this all the way until I can't see any more threads into the radiator. Then I wired it through this little hose that was provided with the fan all the way and then plugged it into here where the probe was plugged in. So now that should monitor the temperature way better as to when the fan turns on. Next thing we're gonna do is put the lower radiator hose on and the upper radiator hose on. So now that we have everything put back together, have all the hoses on, everything's good. Make sure to put the sensor back into the lower radiator hose. Everything is clear, tight. We're going to remove the cap from the expansion tank and then come over to the inside of the car. We're going to go position 1 and then put the heater on low. Make sure the snowflake is off. Make sure you're on heater, 91 degrees. Now we're filling up the expansion tank. We want to get it basically full. Now this is a mixture of 50-50 coolant and distilled water. So we're gonna leave it like that for just right now. It's pretty full, but as you can see, it's going down.
Oh,
so
it went down more.
Yeah, no. So we're gonna open this bleed screw right here on the upper radiator hose until coolant starts coming out. Now, if it starts coming out right away, then say just let it flow for like 2 seconds and then just put it back in. Okay, so see, there's nothing coming out yet. Just make sure you put that right there, because as soon as coolant starts coming out, we're going to close it up. Okay, so now that it's coming out like that, we want to put the bleed screw in and tighten it with the screwdriver. And now the level shouldn't really be going down, so you just want to fill up the expansion tank now. So now I'm just topping off the oil a little bit with a quart of liquid moly 10W60, since we lost all of that oil from the oil cooler. So I had the car on, I was just waiting for the electric fan to turn on, which it did. So that means everything is working good. So let's take a look at the temperature. So yeah, temperature's looking good. Oil's still heating up. And the coolant is at about a middle right now. So we're gonna take it for a test drive and see how it holds up. But so far, nothing is leaking. All right, so these wires right here is what used to be the expansion tank coolant level sensor. So what I did is I cut the connector off for the sensor, and then I stripped the cover off of the wires and I twisted them together. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this heat shrink tubing and I'm gonna just put it around so it could be protected, and then maybe add some electrical tape after. Okay, so this is how the level sensor ended up. I just put a heat shrink tube and put tape on the top and bottom to fully cover the wires. So now we're gonna start the car up and see if the coolant light is still on. All right, so we got the car started up. As you can see, there's no more coolant light on there. So that officially finishes the installation for everything that we did.